Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, let's go. Dear gods, this was satisfyingly petty, and I just had to share. I, a 30-year-old female, went to the grocery store to pick up prescriptions for myself and my two roommates, who happened to be my amazing grandma, aged 73, and great-grandmother, aged 94. While on my way out, I decided to grab one of the $35 value packs of fireworks for the 4th of July, which was the next day. They were really excited, and it made me just as excited, as I like setting things on fire, legally. Last important note for this story is we live in a trailer park that used to be a community for people aged 55 and older. It hasn't been for at least 5 years. Anyhow, here's the juice. I went out and started setting up at sunset. I moved cars, cleaned the area up, wet the ground to cool it down, and dampened the house and bark dust. I also set up a 5-gallon water bucket about 1/3 filled to put our used fireworks into. Where I live, you can't have anything that shoots into the air like a projectile. Only fountains and such are allowed. It doesn't stop people from crossing to other states to get the big boys. But I am not one of them. My neighbors were, though. It will come up later. Hee hee. So I help my 94-year-old great-grandmother down, and we get set up in the driveway and start setting off a couple of smaller fountains. The snaps and crackles of a couple caught us very off guard. We were having a blast. About 15 minutes into it, a car stops and waits for our current fountain to finish, or so I thought. The driver, an elderly woman in her 70s it looked like, gets out and shouts at us that we are not allowed to shoot off fireworks on park property. I looked at her a bit dumbfounded and asked her what she said. She repeated herself and told us if we continued, we would be put up for eviction from our property. I asked her if she was park management, and she replied she wasn't, but she was head of the park's rules committee and had been since she moved here in 2016. We had never heard of it after living here since 2014. She snapped that it is in our rules and we need to read up on them and cease our violation of the rules or she would have us kicked out. She finally went on her way, and I scoffed a little. My grandmas were both a bit shaken and told me to just stop, but I felt PETA. So, with my thousands of hours of body cams and listening about entitled people on Reddit, I looked down and remembered my phone had been recording the entire time because I was filming our fireworks. So I went for a walk, wondering who this lady was. I spotted some familiar neighbors who have been here for over 20 years, and I asked them if we had a park rules committee. All 3 of them stared at me like I had 7 heads. Yeah, that's what I thought. I asked them about the rules and the eldest confirmed it wasn't allowed, but as long as we were being safe, no one was going to give us trouble. I told her about my setup and showed her the video of the lady. They were dumbfounded and said she was full of it. As I was walking back, I spotted her standing in her front yard, staring at me. It was right across from the sweet old lady's house, so I pointed and yelled, "Hey, there she is, it's the park rules committee head." She glared at me and snapped, "I am the head of the park's rules committee." The elderly man who walks his dog 3 times a day that was behind me scoffed and went, "No you're not, lady. Happy 4th. She was upset and stormed back into her house. That wasn't the pettiest part though. Because remember my neighbors, they were a bit younger, like me. When I told them what had happened, they started setting off the biggest and loudest ones, because we all live pretty close by. I hope she had a good 4th, honestly. I'll update you when I get our eviction notice. Winking face, happy Independence Day. Stay petty, America, you know what I mean. This story happened to me when I was about 10 years old. My family and I were at an amusement park, which we always visited for a day every year. We had a lot of fun with all the different attractions. The park also had smaller attractions for children that used park coins. I was always a very patient person and always avoided conflicts because I am also very sensitive. As a child, politeness and respect were always the most important things to me, whether dealing with a child or an adult. I always got on better with older people than children my age. In any case, There was a pirate attraction with 2 ships where several children could shoot cannons loaded with foam balls at each other. It was in a closed room, and the parents could watch from outside through a grate. These cannons, however, required special coins to work. I had always been a pirate fan, and was keen to try it out. We were never a wealthy family, and so I was taught how important saving is. These coins only cost €1 or so, but I didn't want to waste money. So I only got 3 coins and went into this attraction. I put a coin in the cannon and started playing with other children, me alone against 4 other children. They bombarded me with the other cannons, and I defended myself as best I could, which wasn't really a problem. But one of the children was a little girl aged 6 to 8 who found it amusing to manipulate me and pushed me and the cannon away so that I couldn't aim and couldn't really play. I asked several times not to push me, but the girl just didn't listen to me. Since she knew that the cannon had a timer, I felt harassed because I was alone against 4 children. The timer was almost at the end, and it was also my second coin. The girl continued to pull and push me after several requests. I didn't want to use any more coins and wanted to take advantage of the time, so I grabbed the girl by the arm, looked her straight in the face and told her to stop. She burst into tears and ran out of the room. I was able to use the time again and play. After a few minutes, a woman shouted at me. At first, I didn't notice her because I was too deep in my defense. When I realized that she was shouting at me, I politely asked what the problem was. The woman replied, "You hit and insulted my daughter." I was taken aback and said calmly that I didn't hit her, and tried to explain my point of view to her. She didn't let me get a word in edgewise, and shouted at me while the girl at her leg grinned maliciously. She said I should apologize immediately, leave her daughter alone, and let her do what she wanted. She apparently thought I was a violent child. During the discussion, a sound signaled that the timer of the cannon had run out. Emotionally charged and feeling attacked from all sides, I left the room, disappointed at how people cannot respect each other. I then found my family and told them what had happened because I was already crying from being insulted for something I didn't do. Afterward, I went to another attraction with my sister to distract myself for a moment. My father, a person with little patience, saw the mother and confronted her. I didn't notice, and came back to see my father and the girl's mother having a heated argument. My mother didn't want to attract attention, and asked my father to be quieter. The mother saw me as a liar and a bully, and insulted me. A little later, the father came, and we explained the situation. He was a very reasonable gentleman, and apparently knew immediately who the liar was, and scolded his wife and daughter. He apologized and took the mother and daughter to the exit of the amusement park. My mother was pretty embarrassed about this incident because we got so much attention, and was angry with my father for reacting like that. I apologized for the situation getting out of hand. We tried to enjoy the day, and I tried to lighten the mood, but it was in vain. Everyone in the family was upset for the day, and we left the park to go home. I thought it was a shame that we lost our mood and fun just because of an argument. But the next year we went back and had a great time. I tried not to mention this story again until a few years later, but I will never forget this experience. Enjoying the stories yet? If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. This story takes place in 2009 when I was 15 years old and my younger sister was 11. While my memory of the events is hazy, I recently spoke to my mother to gather some missing details, which helped to piece the story together. My parents had divorced when I was 10, and although my mother had primary custody, my sister and I would stay with our father for about 3 days a week, sometimes more. Our parents took turns celebrating holidays with us, alternating each year. This arrangement allowed us to spend 1 year with one parent and the next year with the other. In March 2009, my father and his then-girlfriend, Molly, ended their relationship after he admitted to cheating with another woman, who would later become my stepmother, referred to as stepmother. I would later discover that the affair had been ongoing for almost 2 years before my father revealed the truth to Molly. In May, during my birthday celebration, my father introduced stepmother to us, and shortly thereafter, they announced their engagement. From that point on, stepmother began exerting pressure on us to become a happy blended family. This often meant disregarding our preferences and prioritizing her own desires or those of my stepbrother, while pretending our mother was not part of the picture. Stepmother and my father started pushing for us to spend more time with them, contrary to the previous custody agreement. Fortunately, our mother stood her ground and refused to yield. As November approached, preparations for the holiday season began. Stepmother started discussing a ski resort or hotel destination that she wanted us to visit. Located 3 hours away from our home, it was clearly more suitable for couples, young children, or the elderly. Neither my sister nor I had any interest in going, but before we could voice our opinions, stepmother asked us when our school break would start, so she could book a 2-week trip for us during winter break. I felt a sense of relief being the one to break the news. According to the custody schedule, we had spent Christmas and New Year's Day with my father and Molly the previous year, which meant it was our mother's turn to have us this year. My father and stepmother made numerous phone calls to my mother, attempting to persuade her to change her mind and allow them to take us. They insisted that stepmother was excited to spend Christmas with us, and argued that the previous year's holidays didn't count because we had spent them with Molly. However, my mother remained steadfast, as she had already made plans. For a few weeks, the subject was dropped. Then, on our last day of school before winter break, stepmother unexpectedly picked up my sister and me from our schools. While it was normal for us to spend a couple of days with our father before the holidays, something felt off. As soon as we got into her car, stepmother said, "We're going to the ski resort." Surprise! She went on to explain that our bags were already packed, and our father would meet us there. I asked if our mother knew about this, to which stepmother replied, "Of course." However, I knew she was lying. I also doubted her claim that we would only be there for a couple of days and return before Christmas. It seemed likely that they had booked the 2-week stay they desired, and would probably guilt-trip us into staying once their initial couple of days had passed. I was consumed by fear. Without a phone, and with no trust in SM, I felt utterly helpless, and my sister appeared even more terrified. I mustered the courage to tell SM that we didn't want to go. Her response was dismissive, saying, "Fine. Let's just pick up stepbrother from school." We arrived at my stepbrother's school, and SM declared, "All right, now let's head to the resort." Once again, I voiced our reluctance to go. SM stubbornly replied, "Fine. Let's just find a gas station and fill up." This back-and-forth exchange occurred about 6 times over the course of the next hour. Every time I expressed our unwillingness, SM would come up with an excuse or conveniently forget my plea. As we were about to leave town, my dad called SM. I overheard them arguing for a few minutes before she abruptly ended the call. Stepbrother asked her what happened, but she remained silent. Then she announced, "I'm taking you kids to your mom's." She turned the car around and drove us home. When we arrived, my mom pulled us out of the car and screamed at SM to leave, which she reluctantly did. My mom hugged us tightly, sobbing as if she hadn't seen us in years. It took a few days for my mom to reveal the full story to me. Essentially, she had panicked because my dad had failed to inform her that we had arrived home, a practice he always followed when picking us up from school. He had been hoping she wouldn't call until we were already at the resort. Realizing that lying would only make things worse, he confessed their plans. He attempted to portray it as something my sister had wanted, but my mother saw through his deception. She warned him that if SM didn't return us to her place, she would involve the police. My father and SM proceeded to take my stepbrother to the resort. For a few months after, they boasted about all the fun they had, and all the things my sister and I had supposedly missed out on. However, my stepbrother later confided in me that he had actually hated the experience. He hardly saw his mom during their stay, and he spent Christmas mostly alone in their room. SM labeled both of us as selfish for trying to ruin their holidays. My sister even carried a burden of guilt for some time, and I had to reassure her, At the time, my mom chose not to involve the police or press charges. She wasn't certain if what SM did constituted a crime, and she doubted whether seeking help would truly make a difference. Moreover, she feared it would irreparably damage our relationship with my father, with whom she was attempting to maintain an amicable connection. However, in hindsight, she admitted regret for not reaching out for assistance. And that is the story of how I acquired my first phone. For reasons I can't quite explain, I harbor a deep resentment toward this story. It has left such a bitter taste in my mouth that I actively avoid discussing it. In fact, this text remained in my drafts for nearly a week. Although it pales in comparison to the worst things SM has done, it still fills me with anger. Nevertheless, writing it all down has offered some semblance of relief, albeit minimal. Years ago, I had a friend who wasn't truly a friend. We were part of a group with 3 girls and 5, occasionally 6 boys. We bonded through elementary school, high school, and then university. We enjoyed science fiction, fantasy, and a bit of computer science. Not quite nerds, but close. In that group, only 2 people liked a certain author. He wrote a series of over 40 books and other standalone works, totaling around 70 to 80 books. My friend P and I could buy all the books twice. One set for him, one set for me. But we had a deal, which was his idea. I would buy books 1, 3, 5, and P would buy 2, 4, 6, and so on. Naturally, it didn't work. It started with the usual issues. I was supposed to buy, for example, book 8 only once because he had some other things to buy. Then he kept that book because he said he bought half of it. I reminded him that I had bought it, but he insisted that he had bought half. He kept my books for months or berated me for asking when I could read his half of the series. Then I had to buy books from his half as well. You can see the pattern. It had nothing to do with being poor. His dad worked at the same company as my dad, but at a managerial level, which meant a great salary. P wanted a new computer. P got a new computer just like that. So I ended up buying close to 90% of the whole series while he could afford his half but decided not to bother. Then he requested that I deliver my books to his house. He had his own car. I couldn't afford mine. But it was logical to him that I should go there by bus, while he didn't bother to pick up the books himself, even though he had a car. It ended with an explosion. My grandfather died, and my grandmother was in very bad shape after almost 60 years together. The whole family took care of her. We took turns and scheduled visits so she wasn't alone. Bought her food, prepared for the funeral, all of that. One week on Wednesday, my grandfather died. Another book was available on Friday, but I decided to buy it after the funeral. P called me on Sunday, and it was a bad quarrel. I reminded him about my grandfather, which he already knew. He called me selfish and so on. So I went to buy the book on Monday and tried to read it quickly to share it with P, but I couldn't focus because I was grieving. I was crying all the time. The funeral was the next Friday. All my friends were in church. They didn't know my grandfather but wanted to help me, support me, or whatever. Not P. One person asked him why he didn't go to church. He said he didn't know my grandfather. So why should he be there? Okay. My other friends didn't know my grandfather either, but they somehow didn't mind when I cried so much that they had to steer me bodily to the taxi, which I couldn't see. They even had tissues for me. I had my own, but they wanted to help, even if it was just a tiny bit. Weirdly, I remember them giving me tissues so clearly. The rest is vague. P called me around 3 hours after the funeral. Relatives were still around, which I explained to him. He was absolutely furious. Again, I was selfish. How dare I hoard the book? How dare I force him to wait for weeks? He demanded that I deliver the book right now and maybe he would forgive me. I repeated that relatives were still around and I wasn't his servant. He could come get the book that very evening. He had a car. He could afford gas. He could deal with it. More screaming ensued. How dare I, blah blah blah. A cousin listened to part of that conversation and suggested he would wait for P to hit his nose. I refused to deliver the book and left the phone in another room. The next stage was a series of emails detailing my selfishness, which, for good measure, he sent to the whole group. That part backfired. One of my friends had listened to the screaming match and told the others what really happened. At that point, I wrote one email to P telling him I'd block his email and phone number. He couldn't believe it. Another friend from that group told me later that P berated me and everyone in our group who took my side, and he never came to get the book. Once in a while, I see friends from that group. We try to meet at least once every 5 years and exchange gossip. They tell me which meetings P wants to attend so I can avoid them. I see him around maybe once every 3 years, but we don't talk. There's no point. I still have that series and eventually got the rest of the books. The part available directly after my grandfather's death, is in bad shape. I don't think I'll replace it. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences and opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.